So we'll dive right into our next session, ladies and gentlemen. We're now focusing on physical wellness. And our distinguished guest for this session is Dr. Sriram Nene with the topic longevity, I love it, to infinity and beyond. Dr. Nene is a distinguished cardiovascular and thoracic surgeon, a visionary entrepreneur and healthcare innovator. He has made significant strides in blending technology and health sciences. Through SNMD Ventures LLP, he focuses on fostering innovation across 4 key sectors: healthcare, media, technology, and business and financial services. He is also the founder of Pathfinder Health Sciences, a groundbreaking platform designed to enhancing lifestyles and lifespans through precision and personalized healthcare. Additionally, he is the co-founder of Dance with Madhuri, a global edutech platform leveraging technology to teach dance and promote cultural learning. We welcome Dr. Nene to the stage.
So welcome to all of you guys, and thank you for staying awake after that big South Indian carbohydrate-rich meal. There will be a quiz at the end, so take some notes and pay attention. First, I wanted to thank Colonel David and Dr. David for inviting me back. I've learned a lot today, actually, and it'll be very hard to comment after such amazing speakers, and so let's try to do that. The name of the topic today is To Infinity and Beyond. And I'll tell you something, I spent 30 years of my life as a physician, and 20 of those operating as a heart surgeon. Millimeters and milliseconds made the difference between life and death. Did 10,000 cases in that time. But what I found is I couldn't change some things. And the one thing you can't change is time. Time doesn't come back. You can't turn back the clock. And so the question is, what is a reasonable approach to taking care of yourselves, as well as a reasonable approach to taking care of your loved ones? Because in the end, it's not what you have, it's who you have on the journey of life. So let's begin. To begin with, we started some big things, and I was practicing breakneck speed in Denver after finishing everything for almost 20 years, did 10,000 cases, but what I found is I couldn't scale medicine. What does that mean? That the fact is you can do 2 to 3 open heart, robotic, minimally invasive endovascular cases a day. 500 patients get your expertise. But in the end, another 2,000 consults. But in the end, there's, at that time, 7 billion people on the planet. And the truth was, there was no way to scale this. Luckily, I had a small adjunct to my skill sets. I was a programmer before I went to med school. I thought, what if you could take all of that information, add it to healthcare, and scale medicine to the last mile using media? And so we created some properties. Pathfinder is one of them. And in the process of that, in 2011, I decided to quit my day job as the head of a group, a partner, a head of a hospital, and operating surgeon, and move to India. My parents, you can imagine, first-generation immigrants from India, said, what are you doing? You know, you're like every Indian's wet dream. You have accomplished everything. You're a heart surgeon. You've saved so many lives. I said, look, I have a bigger purpose. There's something we can do together and join hands to scale medicine to the last mile and democratize healthcare. So along the way, we created RNM Moving Pictures, which is a platform-agnostic digital content company. We created an edutech to scale education and filmed it with dance, and then we created Pathfinder. But along the way, this whole set of companies came into play along with the websites. And this led to something interesting. I'm looking at the time, because it's the time you have on the earth. You have so many heartbeats, so many seconds, so many years. And some of that is dictated by your DNA and by your habits. But the truth is, we think now we've gotten into anti-aging and gotten into a huge industry which could amount to $93 billion. But let's take a step back. 500, 600 years ago, Ponce de Leon looked for the fountain of youth. What if that fountain of youth was already available to you in the way you take care of yourself, in your habits, in your lifestyles, in some of the things you do?
And what if mechanistically we start to understand what parts of your cellular machinery and DNA are affected? There's something called a...
So the truth of this is, at least right now, our lives are finite. The oldest recorded human was 122 years old. But there's estimates that we could live to 150 years old. And if you're a science fiction buff, we could live for infinite years and just transfer the memories and consciousness across different skins, vis-a-vis altered carbon or something like that. But we don't have that kind of technology. So what we're stuck with is a combination of our genes and the other things. So let's define a few terms. What limits human lifespan? These are some technical terms I'm going to throw at you. No test at the end. But the things which we look at now are biologic clocks, including telomere shortening, mitochondrial dysfunction, cellular senescence, immune system aging, and DNA damage. And these now can be measured to tell you not only what your chronologic age is, but what your physiologic age is. Why is that important? Because you'd be surprised how many of you guys live hard. You're like saddles ridden hard and put away wet. They don't age well, right? But the idea is if we can measure exactly what your physiologic age is, maybe there's something we could do. So what could extend it? There's been a number of postulated explanations. The first is caloric restriction. And we'll go through that. It's proven in animals and in early human data, and it can add up to 5 to 10 years. Senolytics, which are investigational, but the idea is that a cell has senescence, which means a lifespan. The truth is, though, that its DNA is still intact. So if you can turn that lifespan around and remove those barriers, you might be able to improve lifespan. Some of this has been investigated in the labs out of Harvard with David Sinclair, and he's shown it in mice. But we don't have translational research, so it's still work in progress. Then there's this epigenetic reprogramming, where we've had success with the animals, and there's some human trials coming, but you can go in and look at these factors called Yamanaka factors, where a scientist named Dr. Yamanaka identified 4 different factors that you can track and potentially change. There's gene therapy, and then there's cryonics. But what does that all mean? What is longevity? Longevity is how long a person or a species lives. And life expectancy specifically is the average age people live in a given place and time and are predicted to reach. You'll see why that's important in a slide or two. But when we talk about lifespan, we talk about the actual age that someone will survive. And now there's a new term called healthspan. And this is an important one, that it's the portion of your life spent in great health. Now imagine if you live to 93, but you can't walk, you're bedbound, and you don't really have your memories about you. How is that helpful to you? So it's not just about life expectancy or lifespans. It's about healthy years. And in my book, I think health span should be lifespan. So I'm going to try to knit this together in a little bit, and you'll see why, because I'm a living example of it. The contributing factors ultimately are genetics and lifestyle, as you'll see. Now, if you thought this was a small endeavor, it's estimated by the year 2028, it will be a $185 billion industry. And it's already shaping up that way. Numerous books have been written, some of which you've seen. Peter Attia wrote Outlive, which is about the science and art of longevity. David Sinclair, a famous PhD scientist out of Harvard, wrote about lifespan and why we age and why we don't have to. And then finally, Eric Topol, a cardiologist out of the Scripps Institute, wrote about superagers. But there's a number of them. I have a book coming too called To Infinity and Beyond, as you'll see. Moreover, Dan Buettner wrote a book called Blue Zones. So what is Blue Zones? How many of you have seen this on Netflix? So blue zones are an interesting phenomenon, and they're basically regions where a higher than usual number of people live much longer than their stated average. And there are 5 blue zones in the world that he identified, and this is an observational study, right? So what that means is he just took all the data of all the people in the area and said, this is what is a blue zone and this is what not. Then he mapped them and he said, what are the important features of those areas which make them blue zones? And So there's a couple of important points that came from that. And what we call is the power 9, right? And these are some take-home points, so these you can jot down. The first is to move naturally, right? What he said is that the people in those areas move naturally. They don't sit on their tail. We've talked about how people are not moving. I think Shashi talked about it on his initial talk about how people are sedentary in their behavior. We're going from an agrarian to an industrialized society where more people are in BPOs, they're binge watching, they're on their phones, so they're not moving as much. But if you move naturally in everything you do and aren't ordering from Zepto and doing other things, and you actually get out and do something, you're going to accomplish that. The second is purpose. This is ikigai in Japanese. It means that your life has to have a purpose. What they find in married couples who live a long period of time, when the dominant spouse passes away, the non-dominant spouse will pass within a year. Part of the reason for that is that that non-dominant spouse loses their purpose. So it's very important to understand the why and the purpose of your life. Next is downshift. Try to purposely slow your life down. It doesn't need to be going 160 miles per hour all the time. Next is the 80% rule. Very important, hara hachi bu in the Japanese culture. And what it means is eat to only 80% full. Think about that, right? We're normally starving when we go to eat. Your eyes are bigger than your stomach, and you get everything on the menu or on the buffet line. And then, being Indians, you don't want to waste anything, so you will finish everything on your plate, right? How many of you have done that today? I can see there's a few people raising their hands here. But the idea is eat to 80% of full and leave some room. Next is plant slant. In these cultures, as well as in studies, we're finding that not just veganism, but if you eat less processed meat and meat in general, it's actually better for you. Now, we live in a culture where 40% of the people are pure veg, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're all eating just plants. But the idea is that in these cultures, most of these people only ate meat 5 times a month, and the remainder of that, they were vegetarian. Interesting, right? This next one I don't necessarily agree with, and I think the French put it there just for effect. I don't know if Buettner's French or not, but they said wine at 5. But why it's important is the social gatherings that you get with the wine at 5, more than the wine. Because the resorcinol is a myth. You can get that from grape juice and blueberries and other things where you don't have to have your glass of wine. And I can tell you in my own personal life, the wine wasn't helping anything because the bottom line is you eat more and you get the munchies after it. Next is belonging. You have to have a deep sense of belonging to a group of people, and you have to feel like you're part of a culture. And if you find your tribe, and that comes up later, it's incredibly important. Next is loved ones first. All of the cultures which we observed living longer always had relationships with their elders, with their kids, and with everyone in between. We've talked about people being on their phones too much. I see it all the time when you go into a restaurant, when people have their phones out, and there's 4 people at a table, they're not talking to each other. How does that work? I made a rule in our house where you put all your phones in a basket when you come to the table, and the conversations became very exciting. Lastly, the right tribe. Pick your friends wisely. And in these populations, what they were finding is that people actually hung out with others who were like-minded, who relieved their stress, were very positive, and they kind of promoted them. So the Power 9 was a very interesting observational study. But I'm going to give you even more now. For me, I was living the dream. I was a heart surgeon doing a lot of cases, really moving at 160 miles an hour, saving lives, sometimes at the expense of my own life. I think many of us have had that, where you're in the best shape of your life in your teen years, where you're working out, you're eating whatever you want, and never getting into trouble for it. And then something happens. You get married, you have kids, you have a career, right? And the idea was that I couldn't scale that to everyone, and nor could I turn back the clock. So I came to India with the idea of democratizing healthcare through media tech and smart services. Along those lines, we created Pathfinder with a precision, personalized healthcare dashboard. But about 18 months ago, it all came back to me when I did my executive physical, which, by the way, I don't believe in executive physicals because I feel like they're fishing expeditions where some company makes money off you doing unnecessary tests, right? I grew up in an era where 80% of your testing was done after you saw the doctor. And 80% of your diagnosis was made from a history and physical. The remaining 20% was corroborative testing. But anyway, I did that. And to my chagrin, my genes, which I knew I had, on my dad's side with diabetes, he had diabetes for 55 years. I put him on my protocols 6 years ago when he was 81. We turned that around, took him off meds, and he's now 87. My mom's side had high cholesterol. And guess what I had? My hemoglobin A1C had gone up to 5.8, which is pre-diabetic, on the verge. My total cholesterol was 267. My LDL was 169. My LFTs had bumped with grade 2 fatty liver on ultrasound. And my weight was up to 91 kilos. And I'm thinking, well, how is this working? And my teams are looking at me and they're saying, Doc, what is wrong with you? You're supposed to be the epitome of healthcare, the guy who's leading the charge, and here you are being the worst offender. So I thought to myself, well, maybe this wasn't a good thing. And let's see what happened then. I personally, for the first 2 months, was in a little bit of denial, but I adopted a high-protein, low-carb diet, a keto diet, Atkins diet, whatever you want to call it, lost about 8 kilos. Labs had come down a little bit. Then I intensified it with a transformation team. And these are specialists on our teams who work with the Bollywood actors, and they get them all ripped up. They work with everyone from Arjun Rampal to Hrithik to all these guys, right? And they put me on a reduced calorie diet of 1,500 calories, and then on top of that, doing 6 workouts a week. And then my doctor said, look, you're on the verge of diabetes. We should start a GLP-1. For any of you who aren't familiar with it, these are the Hollywood, Bollywood drugs, which I fought. And I'm like, look, I don't need vanity. I'm not doing this for that. But they said, look, the criteria are different. And you'll see why that became important. And so we kept that up for 18 months. With the caloric deficits, with the strength and aerobic workouts, with the GLP-1s, I also added one more thing to it. I switched over from a carnivore, red meat eating, heavy drinking kind of guy, not really heavy, 1 or 2 a night with my friends. I went vegan and I stopped drinking completely. And that was 16 months ago. And I thought it would be hard, right? And the problem, there were a couple of things. One is, vegan is not easy. It's like this buffet that we had downstairs. They had nothing vegan, by the way. And it's just really veg with no animal products. But you have to think about it for a moment. So the first month was a challenge. The second thing is your habits, right? I wasn't a heavy drinker. I'd have 1 or 2, but you got the munchies after drinking. And the bottom line is you couldn't really exert your discipline. And so in doing those 2 steps, along with the other steps, everything changed. And the outcome was that over about 16 to 18 months, I dropped 20 kilos, went down to 15% body fat, and now I'm shooting for Men's Magazine next month. And when you see the shots, you'll be amazed. But why was that important? It wasn't for me that I did this. It was for all of you. Because in my belief, I think if we can take all of our family and friends with us for 100 years, that's the killer part of what I do. What are the hottest topics in longevity in 2025? Well, guess what? Incretins, which are the GLP-1s and gastrointestinal peptide receptor agonists, are not just for weight loss, but there's been multiple studies now which have shown 20% reduction in cardiovascular mortality at 4 years in non-diabetic patients. In diabetic patients, at 2 years, there's a 40% reduction in renal failure. And they're finding now, studies in 2025 are showing improved longevity. So what we thought were just the Hollywood, Bollywood, Oprah Winfrey, Elon Musk, all of these other influencer drugs to reduce weight, while they were used for diabetes originally and then dropped weight, they actually weren't. I'm going to speak more on that later. Other things which are there are partial epigenetic reprogramming, senolytics, proteomic organ age blood tests. This is an interesting field because what we're finding is that not all organs age at the same speed. And you can actually do blood tests now which will measure what your heart's doing versus your kidneys versus your brain. And that can actually help you in how you approach it. Then there's other things like rapamycin from Easter Island and Rapa Nui, which is a fungus, and it's been used continually for immune suppression in transplant patients. But what they're finding is it can actually be used for longevity and for decreasing inflammation. And we think inflammation is the moderator both in rapamycin as well as in the incretins and some of the others. Then there's microbiome, very hot topic. Your gut-brain axis is something which people are looking at because we're finding out more and more information. Then there's stuff which Brian Johnson talks about, which I think is foo-foo, but the young plasma exchange data has not borne out, but it makes sense because you have more stem cells in young plasma than you do in adults. And so there may be some value to that later. There's other things like the clotho as a therapeutic target. It's a gene trend where you can actually go in and modify it and improve longevity. And then finally, AI-driven clocks and drug discovery via AI are the hot topics. But what matters most are simple things, right? It all boils down to this. And I've made this interesting graph where on the right, you can see the level of evidence and whether it's strong, moderate, emerging, preclinical, or speculative. And on the left, you see sleep optimization, exercise in zone 2, plus strength training, caloric restriction, time-restricted eating are the most important parts of that. Well, guess what I did? All of those. The others are there, and they're for reference only because they're still evolving. The evidence-based lowest risks you can do for yourself are diet. Either a time restriction, which is an IF, intermittent fasting routine, or caloric restriction, where you eat less calories. And I did caloric restriction because on IF I would get so hungry, there was no point. I would be eating my shoes, basically. And then the second would be a plant-based diet, predominantly with some Mediterranean characters. Now I wiped that out because I have 4 problems with, and why I went to veganism. I'm lactose intolerant, so I don't tolerate milk products anyway. I don't like how animals are treated, and I'm against animal cruelty, part of PETA. Then animal husbandry and agriculture is much worse for the planet and not sustainable. And lastly, animal fats are more injurious than plant fats. So for me, those 4 reasons is why I went vegan. Next is the exercise in zone 2, 4 times a week, and strength 3 times a week. Next on the list was sleep optimization. And 7.5 to 8 hours a day with circadian rhythm tracking is critical, as well as having sleep hygiene. For all you guys who are busybodies and keep late hours, not the best thing for your body. And you can get these trackers now, which we'll talk about in number 5, which can help you to change those habits. Hygiene is also important. Sleeping in a colder place, having clean sheets, having low light, no phones for an hour before you go to sleep is very helpful. Next is stress resilience, mindfulness, daily heart rate variability tracking. And then lastly, using the trackers to reinforce it. I have 5 pillars: diet, exercise, sleep, water, and mindfulness. If you remember those, and by the way, all of these things are on my channels as well. We have 500,000 people subscribed on my YouTube channel. I've done these talks before, and you can go there for reference. This is an interesting slide, and I won't spend too much time on it, but dietary restriction has been shown throughout species to improve lifespan. That was the point of this slide. Incretins we talked about already, but they are something which have improved cardiovascular mortality, kidney disease progression, and renal failure. Obstructive sleep apnea, they proved in large studies to actually get over sleep apnea. Weight and body composition is obvious. And then something else which you may have heard about, metabolic liver disease, which is fatty liver disease, what they used to call it, endemic in populations like ours where we're having a nice go with mild to moderate obesity. 23% of our population has it now. But metabolic liver disease is on the rise. And so these drugs have actually been improving that. The problem is there's no direct lifespan trials, but the randomized control trials that they've done actually are very, very, very strong. The main thing is you have to have practical guidelines on these, and you have to avoid frailty weight loss. What that means is if you do the Ozempic, Wegovy or Mounjaro, there's a 2:1 muscle to fat loss. And so you see these pictures with people with Ozempic face. That's why they get it. They lose weight so fast, and they lose their buccal fat pads and all of that. So the key is to bulk up your protein, make sure you're working out, while at the same time losing weight over a stronger period. And then obviously enjoying the safety contraindications. Finally, what's actionable now out of the whole list that I've given you? From a metabolic standpoint, the GLP-1s per the label, blood pressure and apolipoprotein B, and zone 2 and strength are definitely there. On the experimental phase, there's a new GLP-1 which is coming out, which has 3 agents instead of 2, which Mounjaro has, and 1, which Ozempic has. Next, for kidneys, they've got a number of different things. For immune and aging, vaccinations, sleep, and stress protocols are very, very helpful. For neuro, you treat the obstructive sleep apnea, you exercise, and you do cognitive training. And then for screening purposes, there's a whole host of different tests coming up where you can test for organs, you can test for heart function, and all the others. Everything else is experimental and on the watch list. Finally, what's the time period or interval you should do this? And I'll publish this data, and I have all the references at the end, but these are sort of what we do in our protocols, and it actually works. Finally, the takeaways and the vision are that monitoring and feedback loops are critical. Becoming a patient in your own platform and having to become a patient. And I would tell people, do something for yourself before someone makes you do it. And my example was as a heart surgeon, putting an incision on someone's chest, always convinced them that they needed to stop smoking, watch what they eat, and work out. But don't let it come to that, right? Third thing is set goals. Make a scalable instance, which is good for the lifetime. And for me, personalized precision healthcare is key. And then the idea is to infinity and beyond. Here's to your health. The final thing is, this is me now. And I don't know if that projects, but I do have the 8-pack, and I do have everything else you need. But I'm not going into Bollywood, so don't ask the question. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. It was a lot of data and a lot of things. We'll have this on the YouTube channel and everything else. I want to open it up to some questions, if I can, with your permission.
To do the honors and present Dr. Nene with a special memento.
Thank you. Thank you. What was your question? I was waiting for his question, actually. Good. Oh, this is so beautiful.
Let's have a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
By the way, this is my second time here, and I'm very grateful for the friendship, for all of you guys, and the opportunity to participate. I learned a lot today, so thank you.